Is that working out for everyone?
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Fantastic. So yeah, my name is Blake Harvard. I'm over here in the United States, in Alabama. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about desirable difficulties. Hopefully kind of just, if you're new to this idea of exactly what is a desirable difficulty, hopefully you'll leave with a little more knowledge. If you already have an idea, hopefully you'll leave with at least something you can take back to your classroom, a couple of nuggets for you to at least think about to make instruction a little better, hopefully. There'll be some questions and answers hopefully at the end of this. And if we don't get to your question, please feel free to send me something on Twitter. You can see my little Twitter handle down there in the bottom right-hand corner, or send me an email or anything. I love talking about this stuff. For some reason, I don't exactly know why, I'm passionate about this. Not necessarily about desirable difficulties, but just doing what's best for my students in the classroom. I'm constantly reading and writing and trying to figure out how best can I instruct my students, and then have them practice and show their learning, and move on from there in the most efficient and effective way. And desirable difficulties is part of that. So I'm happy to talk about it today. So just a little bit to get us going on, like, well, what do we mean by desirable difficulties? Kind of the origins, I guess you would say, of desirable difficulties. The idea, or at least the phrase, came from Dr. Robert Bjork, who currently works at UCLA. And oddly enough, he works at the Bjork Learning and Forgetting Lab. So he's kind of big time. If you haven't read anything on Robert Bjork, you probably need to. Dr. Bjork. Now, he actually works with his wife, Elizabeth Bjork. They both run the Bjork Learning and Forgetting Lab there in UCLA. And, this isn't kind of as an aside here. They're lovely, lovely people. They're awesome. I've had the ability to be on a couple of Zoom calls with them in the past couple of months, and work with the lab a little bit and talk research and stuff. And they are beyond just the nicest people. For the big names that they are in cognitive psychology and education, they are so down to earth and nice. So, just as an aside, it doesn't really help any, but it's nice to know that the people you're working with are nice, right? So, and down there, you see 1994, Dr. Robert Bjork first mentioned desirable difficulties in that, I think it's a chapter actually out of a book that you see there, but it's hard to get a handle on that. And honestly, I love to read research, and when I'm reading research, I want it to be as nice and neat as it can. While I read a lot of research, I'm not a researcher. So, that's kind of a different type of technical reading. And so the 2011 article down there, Making Things Hard on Yourself, but in a Good Way, is very, very good and very readable. So I would definitely, say go to Google Scholar or go to ResearchGate right now while things are pretty free. And find that one, download it, and give it a read. It's not very long, maybe 10 or 11 pages, I think. I'm not sure. But it's really easy to read and will give you a really good handle on it. And a lot of the stuff I mentioned today comes from that article. Anytime you see quotations, just know it's coming from that 2011 article there. Okay. So what are desirable difficulties, right? So desirable difficulties, as it says in that paper, there are different types of conditions that can lead to desirable difficulties for learners. And when we talk about desirable, there are conditions that require the student to think, require cognition, but aren't so difficult that it can't be done, right? Which we're going to see in a minute would be called undesirable difficulties. And the Dr. Bjork, give 4 conditions here that can lead to desirable difficulties. And I'll mention them here, and then I'm going to expand on them in just a minute, right? Varying conditions of practice, spacing practice. You've probably heard of that before. If not, that might be one of the most valuable things I talk about today, spacing practice. Interleaving instruction, and then generating information, which could also be called retrieval practice, which you've probably heard of before also. If not, you're going to learn a lot about that today too. So I want to talk a little bit about these 4 conditions that are desirable for learning. that put a little bit of difficulty, I'll say, on the student, on the learner, but in a desirable way that can lead to learning, which is the key, right? Which is the key. And so let's get going here. So the first condition here, I'm sorry, talk about an undesirable difficulty. Sorry. And they mentioned this in the 2011 article, right? It's undesirable for the most part. An easy way to say it is it's undesirable if it's too difficult, right? If you threw some type of complex calculus in front of me right now, that would be an undesirable difficulty. I'm not going to be able to do it, right? It's not that any amount of trying isn't going to get me there, right? On the other side of that, if you just give me simple arithmetic, that's also probably going to be undesirable too, because it's too easy, right? As it says down there, there's kind of a sweet spot in there for students. That's going to require some cognition, require some thought, but the goal of retrieving information or answering the question can be achieved, even though it might be a little difficult, right? And there's a lot of research out there on retrieval practice and why those desirable difficulties work. And I'm going to mention a couple of those theories today as we go through these things. So the first condition here is varying conditions of practice. So, we tend to think of the classroom, obviously, for where teaching is done, right? But that doesn't have to be the only place where students can be instructed. It doesn't have to be the only place where students can practice their information. You think homework or studying and things like that. And what this condition is talking about is, learning in one condition, studying in another, right? Or literally varying the conditions of the practice. If the conditions are predictable, if the questions are always the same, they're always asked the same way, yes, students may answer the questions correctly, but when the context changes, right? Kind of that transfer of learning, right? Yes, they know what this definition means by itself, but if I throw it into some scenario, can they pick out that, oh, in this scenario, we're talking about this term, this definition, or by varying that condition, by varying that context, is it too difficult now? Right? So by varying conditions, whether that means varying how we ask questions, how we instruct, or simply where, one of the bits of research that the Bjorks talk about is literally changing where the students learn. The environment around them can lead to more learning. And that's one of the theories there is that if you're learning in different contexts, not only are you learning the information within that context, but you're learning what's going on around you. It can be literally how the room smells, what you're seeing around you. Are you in a coffee shop? Are you at your home? Are you in a classroom? So not only are you kind of encoding and storing that bit of text or that bit of information that you need, but you're also getting the context around you also. And the more contexts you have, the more cues you have to retrieve that information. And that's just one theory there of why retrieval practice works and why, practicing information over and over again, because you're not just retrieving the information, the school information, but it's also the context around you, which gives you more cues for learning, which is pretty interesting, right? So varying conditions can place a learner under desirable difficulties. It may be a little more difficult, but that's okay. We're encoding more, we're learning more, hopefully, right? The second one here is spacing study. And again, it's also called distributive practice. You've probably heard of this before, as opposed to massed practice or cramming for a test or whatever. Yes, if you cram for a test, if the kids come in and study for 5 minutes right before they take a vocab quiz, that's going to help them for 5 minutes, right? It's going to help them for a little bit. And I don't mean literally just 5 minutes. Don't get my times there. But in the long term, the next day, a week down the road, they're probably not going to remember those definitions that they just crammed for, right? The spacing of the study will be much more advantageous for students for long-term retention of information, right? So covering something today and then 24 hours later and then later. And that, these are types of conversations I have with my students in class. I'm lucky enough to teach psychology. So I'm talking to my students about memory and learning and all of these things, cognition. And in these conversations, I'm talking to them about how they can remember more. It's built into my curriculum. So I'm very lucky in that sense. But I talked to them literally about this. Hey, plan ahead, right? Plan for 15 minutes of study tonight, and then 15 tomorrow, and then 15, put the phone away for 15 minutes, right? And just study, practice, answer questions, right? And then the next night, do it again. And the next night, do it again. And just keeping it as simple as that. There are way more complex ways to space work out, right? But just getting them to, plan ahead a little bit is a massive task for teenagers, especially. A couple of examples down here at the bottom of how I work this into my classroom. One of the activities I do is called last lesson, last week, and last month. So the students will come into class. I'll have 3 questions from yesterday's class. I'll have 3 questions from last week and 3 questions from like a month ago, right? Around there, obviously. And I'll have the students sit quietly and attempt to answer these questions. Some of these questions are going to be straight recall, right? Fill in the blank, no help. You either know it or you don't. And some of them may be recognition. There may be some multiple choice, but for the most part, it's probably going to be recall. And it's interesting to see my students look at their results. I did this in my classroom over a couple of weeks and months here. And it was interesting on the end when we looked at our results with my students. Last lesson, last week, and last month, surprising my students, they did the best on the last month, right? So information that was a month ago, they did the best on. And the reason they did the best on it is that a couple of weeks ago, it was the last week information, right? And then the day after we learned it, it was the last lesson. So the last month stuff, this wasn't the first time they'd heard it. It was like the 3rd or 4th time they've heard it. And they spaced out their practice of that information and they saw the results. And it surprised even them, right? You would assume, right? I think our intuition would tell us, and if we know anything in learning, that you probably shouldn't trust your intuition on studying and such. Your intuition would tell you that you'd probably remember the stuff from yesterday, and then the stuff from last week, and then the month would be the worst stuff. But that's not so if you spaced out your practice and gone over that last month information 2 and 3 times, right? So when I'm doing that information last week, or last lesson, last week, last month, I want to make sure it's the most important, the most crucial information for their understanding, right? And another quick little bit about that, it's really cool when there's some type of thread that ties the information from yesterday to the information from last week to the information from last month, right? And you can easily see this in like a history class where one event, what we were studying a month ago led to, those events were like a domino to what we were studying a week ago was a domino to what we were studying yesterday, right? And it really helps the students to see continuity within the curriculum, which is really cool. And, they don't get to see that or hear about that a lot. The last one down there, the brain dump. This is incredibly easy. Students come into class. There are 4 or 5 terms on the board. I want them to tell me everything they can. Write down anything they can about that information. And whether they think it's something really silly or it's very serious, write it down, right? Because those could be cues that lead to more information that they can recall. So it's literally like you're just dumping out all the information out of your brain that you know about a particular subject, right? And it's really cool to have the kids come in and write about 4 or 5 concepts, terms, whatever, ideas, people, right? And then say, all right, you've got your information. Now go to your notes and see what you can add to your brain dump, right? But also know that whatever you're adding because of your notes, your brain didn't know it. So don't think that you knew it on your own, right? And then, okay, now turn to your partners, the people around you. What did they know that you didn't know, right? And what can you add in there? So they're hearing this information over and over again. They're spacing their study. They're planning ahead. And according to the Bjorks and an incredible amount of research there, this is very advantageous for learning. I think the last little sentence there, one of the most general and robust effects across the entire history of research on learning and memory. So this is something you definitely need to try to introduce to your students and get them thinking about because it will help them to learn more. And if they learn more, their grades are better. If their grades are better, they're happier students, and happier students are better students for the most part, right? Third condition here is interleaving instruction. Now, I'm not going to lie, this is the most difficult for me to kind of wrap my head around. And I've been in some ed chats before and talked to some people before, and this tends to be one of the learning strategies that is the most difficult to use. So interleaving versus blocked studying. Blocked studying is covering everything of a particular concept, then moving on to the next concept and covering everything in that concept and then moving on, so on and so forth, right? Whereas interleaving is you get a little bit of everything, and it's kind of you go from one subject to the next, and then you come back to another one, you add in another one, right? And it sounds difficult, and it's a little daunting for a teacher to consider, right? And I can see where this would be more advantageous for certain subjects over others, right? I think that, in math, it'd be hard to move on from one concept before the students had it down, but to move on to another one that built on it, right? But in some subjects, you can leave a subject or a particular concept, go to another one, and then come back to it, right? And what it does is, and there are two theories down here for why interleaving works here, is that number one, it may force the learner to kind of deal with interference, right? There's proactive interference for learning and retroactive interference. So what it might do is it might make that learner think about, okay, well, what context did I learn this in, right? What does this apply to? And by doing that, they're thinking, they're being being cognitive with their efforts, I guess, right? About their learning, which is much better than just, going with the flow, right? And another kind of theory for why it works is it forces those students to reload memories, right? Which is kind of similar to the first theory there. And if I'm reloading memories, if I'm having to recall information and retrieve that information, right? That's just as good as retrieval practice there. And I'm more likely to remember it, okay? And this is another one of those kind of ideas and learning strategies where it's really slow going, a lot like space studying. Students want to see results immediately. And you don't get that a lot with spaced practice, and you don't get that a lot with interleaving. You don't get it quickly, I'll say, sorry. And it's hard for them not to see that they're getting better, and things are gonna be confusing at first, right? When you're going from topic A to B to C, and then back to A, and then B, and then C, and so on and so forth. But in the end, they're going to be much better off for it, because they're going to be able to use that information probably in context better, right? Because they will have heard it in more context and apply it more widely, in however they need to, right? Whatever way. Okay. So interleaving instruction is a difficult one. And I won't kid you that this is an easy one for me. This is the most daunting one for me to consider, even though I'm teaching psychology and the information I can skip around a bit. It's still daunting to try and think about and try to plan out. You got to plan way ahead with this. All right. The last of the, conditions here, right, is generating information and using tests as learning events, right? So instead of just giving information to students, instead of simply rereading information and things like that, generate ideas, generate answers, right? We see this more often called retrieval practice. If you use Twitter, which you probably do, if not, you really need to. But just go search retrieval practice, and there's going to be a ton of information. I have a ton on my website. Kate Jones is fantastic about it. Powerful Teaching is a fantastic book that goes all into all of this stuff, by the way. I highly recommend that book. But retrieval practice, generating information, right? Anytime a learner is forced to try and use that information, they're going to be better off for it, right? Because number one, if they can recall it, they've retrieved it. So now that memory is literally stronger. If they can't retrieve it, now they know they don't know it, right? How often do students leave a classroom thinking they know information, right? Because, hey, I heard the teacher say it, right? I heard him or her talk about it. I know it, right? Well, 24 hours, they probably don't, right? Or they're going to forget a lot of it. So by forcing students to retrieve information, or learners to retrieve information, they can either retrieve it or they can't. And now they know what they don't know. And hopefully they can plan out their space studying better, right? Hey, I didn't know this information. I need to add this to what I look at tonight, or so on and so forth, right? So generating information, retrieval practice, as far as I'm concerned, is probably the most important thing you can have your students do in class, right? Get the information to them, and then provide opportunities for them to get that information out somehow, okay? So if we're trying to put these kids in these desirable difficulties, right, and we've looked at these 4 conditions, it's tough, because let's just say, for instance, you have 30 kids in your class, right? If you got 30 kids in your class, what may be a desirable difficulty for one student might not be a desirable difficulty for another. It may be too easy or too difficult, right? And I don't pretend to have all the answers here, but here's something that I've read about somewhat recently that I'm going to try and instill next year in my class, and it's called Diminishing Cues Retrieval Practice. So it is retrieval practice. It's asking questions of students, and it's trying to get them to answer them, right? But that's standard retrieval practice. Ask a question, get an answer back. Ask a question, get an answer back, right? But this diminishing cues, what it does, and when you think of a cue is anything that can help you solve the answer, right? Maybe it's a hint, maybe it's a word, right? Maybe in multiple choice questions, it's having multiple options, right? There can be cues that can help them to retrieve. But with diminishing cues retrieval practice, let's say today, and this will work in with spaced practice also. Today, I'm going to ask them questions about, in my class, one thing we're going to talk about is Zimbardo's prison experiment. Okay, that's a massive experiment in psychology. Everybody learns about it. The validity of it's up in the air there, honestly. But we talk about Zimbardo, Dr. Zimbardo, and his Stanford prison experiment. Well, the first day we try to retrieve, I may provide 3 or 4 cues to help them answer questions, right? And what that does is it may err on the side of being too easy for some, but by providing extra cues for students, it might make it to where it's not too difficult for anyone, right? And then, so they've got 3 or 4 cues. And then the next time we revisit this information, instead of providing 3 or 4 cues, I provide 2 cues, right? So now they've spaced their practice. They're retrieving that information, right? But there's fewer cues. Okay, and you can see how the cues are diminishing, all right? And then when we look at it again, maybe I don't provide any cues, and this is just straight recall. Maybe it's a brain dump, and I just say, tell me all you can about Zimbardo. Students, hopefully, by studying multiple times on this, have developed different cues that will help them, right? Internalize those cues in different contexts, and now they know more about it. And what this does, and they've done, there's a study on this. Again, go to Google Scholar or to ResearchGate and look up diminishing cues retrieval practice, and I may try to share it later. And actually, I've got if you go to my website, I've got a blog on this where they've done research, and they've compared diminishing cues retrieval practice to standard retrieval practice. And the diminishing cues, for the most part, got better results, which equals more learning, right? Which is what we're all after, I think. Small study, don't get me wrong. It's not the end all be all. There definitely needs to be more work on this, but it's a step in the right direction, I think. It widens the range, as it says up there, of conditions to make it more desirable for students, right? It puts more students in a desirable position instead of just standard retrieval, where it may be too difficult for 2/3 of your class, and now they're sitting there with nothing to do because they can't recall the information. With diminishing cues, again, they get a couple of cues the first time, fewer cues the second time, maybe 1 cue, and then no cues. They've looked at the information spaced out. They've been retrieving it. Much, much higher probability that they'll be able to retrieve the information when they need to on some sort of assessment or whatnot. Okay, which is the goal, like I said. Okay, so just an idea there. Like I said, it's not everything, but it's an interesting way of thinking about how can I reach more students in class with desirable difficulties, which is something I've been thinking a lot about. Now, here's where my thinking is right now. Switching from desirable difficulties to getting our students to desire difficulties, which just saying it sounds sounds pretty horrible, right? Thinking of students and getting them to make the conscious effort to say, I'm not going to take the easy way out. I'm not just going to reread my notes, right? I'm not just going to do the easy thing. I'm going to put myself into these desirable difficulties, right? I'm going to space my practice. I'm going to plan ahead. I'm going to ask myself questions and see what I know and what I don't know. I'm not going to lie to myself and just say, yeah, I know that. How do we get students to do that on the regular basis? And again, I don't have all the answers, but with my students, I teach high school students. So I'm teaching kids that are anywhere from 15 to 17, maybe 18 in my class. But, so it's easier with me to do this than with maybe middle school and whatnot. But I'm talking to my students about this stuff, this research, right? Which is something that's, for the most part, foreign to our students. Like, I think it says a lot. I hope my students take this in a great way when I say, look, here's a study on this, and we are looking at a research paper. They don't get to do that a lot. But what I do think that does is it makes them feel like, oh, well, this is important. And he cares about my learning, right? And he's not just making this up, right? He's not just making this up. There's some science behind it. So I have explicit conversations with my students about retrieval practice, spacing out practice, different contexts and things like that. Inform the students, include them in the conversation about it, right? Hold little mini experiments in your class where you space information, right? Like I've done in class. Do these things. Again, even if the experiment goes haywire, right? At least they're studying the information and they're retrieving that information, and they're going to be better for it. They're going to be better for it. So include them in on the conversation. Think about how you want to talk to them about this, right? And try to get our students to desire these difficulties, right? Model it, do little experiments, things like that, so that they can see this leads to more learning, right? One other thing that I did one time with my students for spaced practice is that, again, we spaced out the practice of some particular information for class, right? So I'll just pretend, again, it was the Zimbardo prison experiment. So we spaced practice on Zimbardo prison experiment for a couple of weeks, and we went over it 3 or 4 times, right? And then we had an assessment on Zimbardo's prison experiment and 2 other big experiments of social psychology, Stanley Milgram experiment and a Solomon Asch experiment with conformity. And then have the kids do this assessment, no help, right? And then they can see that, wow, we spaced out our practice and we looked at this information for Zimbardo 3 or 4 times. We didn't look at the Solomon Asch information more than once. We didn't look at the Stanley Milgram information more than once. And look how much better we did on the Zimbardo than we did on the Solomon Asch and the Stanley Milgram experiment. Let them see that this leads to better learning. I don't know that there's a more efficient or effective way of getting them to do this than to show them, right? Let them see the information, let them see the research, and go on from there. And again, this is the ultimate goal, I think. Having our students desire these difficulties so that when they leave our classrooms, for my students, a lot of mine are going to go on to college and university. I think the last statistics I saw were something like 90% of the students from my class go on to college and university. Well, they need to know how to study, because when they get there, their professors are not going to hold their hand and have multiple attempts at retrieval practice in class. They need to know how to set that up themselves. So, it's one of those things that we teach our kids that lasts a long time. That isn't something that's necessarily in our curriculum for most people, but man, it helps our learners out so much, and is the big goal here, I think, right? And I think that is it for me. So some questions, hopefully I can provide some answers. And again, I won't pretend to know everything, but I will try to answer, or if I can't, I'll try to send you somewhere to get some answers. And I don't know what to do at this point, whether I need to stop sharing or whatnot. Actually, I'll do that.
Oh, no.
No, don't yet. It's all right.
Cool.
Lou,
I'm panicking. Yeah, Jake, you need to unfortunately tag team me and Dave back in, because
right. So I've reclaimed the host.
Perfect.
So Blake, bless him. You just shouted at him. Blake, basically, what happened at another event? I basically stopped it all, and it just all broke down because of that. So it's fine.
Okay.
But don't worry, I've reclaimed host, so it's all fine. It's all on me now.
Can you
so Lou, I'll make you host.
Yeah.
Then you should be able to do it now.
Right. Yeah, I'm in.
There you are. Hello.
Perfect.
And then if I'll reclaim host. And Dave's now host. Everyone attending is probably thinking, what on earth are they doing?
Right, I know. Thank you. I'm going to say thank you. Previously on Twitter, and I know we have a laugh and a joke, and Jake did shared a tweet about being starstruck. I I am honestly completely taken aback. I cannot. That was just absolutely amazing. I'm blown away. I've got so many questions. I've got so many things that I want to talk to you about.
Sure.
It was just, honestly, it's just absolutely amazing. I think we'll ask, does anybody else have any questions in the chat at all first? Or
I haven't spotted it yet. So everyone watching, there's whack questions in that chat box, and then we will pose it to Blake. I've got a question. Can I ask my question? Is that
yes,
all right?
you can. I'll let you go
I always
first.
do this. So Blake, basically, I just get front row seats. So I just get to ask people questions.
Fair enough.
I love it. So for me, then, it's you said about. I love how you used it. We wanted to get students to desire difficulties, aren't we? And that's sort of that's like the holy grail, isn't it? That's what we want.
Sure. I think so. Yeah.
It seems to me a little bit, though, similar to building resilience in students. And of course, we're sort of moving away from that idea, but I think you're suggesting that we're doing that for a subject-specific focus, aren't we?
So that, I'm sorry, some of that broke up. Say it again.
That's right. So we're trying to get students to desire difficulties.
Sure.
But I presume you're suggesting we should do that perhaps with a subject focus through the retrieval.
Yes. No. Yeah. For sure. I think so. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles, specifically with the difficulties you can set, is getting your students to transition from, or just change how they study, right? Because studying for almost every student has just been look at my notes, read my textbook, things like that, where loads of research has shown that no, asking yourself questions and trying to recall information is so much better. Is it more difficult? Yes. Is it kind of disheartening to find out you don't know information that you thought you knew? Yes. But what I tell my students all the time is that you'd rather know now that you don't know it than find out on the test. Because if you find out on the test that you don't know it, well, it's too late now, right? It's too late. So you'd rather ask yourself the test question before the test, so to speak, so that you figure it out. And then you can kind of tailor your studies from there and say, oh, I didn't know this, and add this back into your studying and whatnot. Yeah, for sure.
Because I think this is what I love about the retrieval. It's that the fact that it's the no stakes, and I know Patrice is here, and I've just been back over Patrice's book as well. But that fostering the environment of making them take that risk, actually take the risk,
sure, and
answer it, because we need to know if it's wrong. You need to know if it's wrong.
Exactly. Right. So yeah. And kids ask obviously, is this for a grade? Is this for a grade? So that low stakes or no stakes, however you want to say it, saying, no, it's not for a grade yet. Right. And I think that's an important part, saying yet. This will eventually be something for a grade. It's not right now. So give your best effort right now. Right. And let's see what you know and what you don't know, and then move on from there. And obviously all of this is a great kind of calibrator for the class. If I ask a question and 80 or 90% of my kids don't know it, well, that's probably my fault to a certain extent, right? I need to talk about this stuff again, or we need to talk about it again. But yeah, the low stakes is immediately going to kind of lower the anxiety. But, and this is going back to Patrice and Dr. Pooja Agarwal, who wrote the book with Patrice there, has done some research into that retrieval practice itself can lower anxiety in students.
Yeah.
And I've got a post up on that. But I think there's some more research that's just come out on that. I can't think about the paper right off the top of my head here. But just practicing this retrieval, getting students used to that difficulty can lower anxiety, right? Because they get used to it. So, yeah.
I think that's for me because I'm now, after watching you, it's about the lowering the anxiety, but when you were talking about that diminishing cues as well, so actually as well, I think almost I love retrieval practice, but actually I know that at some points actually I've got to accept that I've got some students that do need a bit of scaffolding, and actually listening to, but I'd not thought of that before, to be honest with you. I just thought kind of, yes, we're going with retrieval. Okay, you give them 4 as opposed to 10.
Right.
But this idea of like the diminishing the cues. Is a
good one. And again, if I'm trying to get my students to be like kind of self-regulate themselves, right? I may give them something where, the questions that are recall are on one half of the paper. And if you need the cue, it's on the right half, but cover it up if you can, right? And then come up with a way of how to delineate. Did I recall this, or did I recognize it after I gave myself cues? And then you can kind of prioritize. Well, I had to use cues on these, so I need to make sure I restudy these. Those that I recalled on my own, maybe not as many times or something, but then you've got the students regulating their own studying more than you having to drive it yourself.
Brilliant. Right? Yeah. I suppose the idea being that I needed the cues for these, so the next time I need to try to not use the cues for those.
Exactly. And there's kind of tying into that is something I posted a lot, but I think it's fantastic, is the brain, book, and buddy, right? Where my students will try to answer 10 questions. And the first time they go through, they only use their brain, and they highlight all their answers in one color. And then the next time they go through, they use a notebook or a textbook, and they highlight all of those answers that they get from their notebook or their textbook in a different color. And then lastly, they use a buddy, a peer. Anything they haven't answered so far, check answers, and they highlight all of those in a different color. So they've probably got 3 different color highlighters, right? And then I have them give themselves 3 different grades. What did I know using only my brain? What did I know using my book? What did I know using my buddy, right? And the only information that they need to know that think that they really, really knew, perhaps, is the stuff when they use their brain, right? If they had to use the book, if they had to use a buddy, then they didn't know it. But they still get the opportunity to learn that information through using their notebook, through using a buddy. And if I'm the buddy that gets to tell you about something, now I'm teaching you about it. And I'm telling you about it, which is going to make my memory of it stronger.
And you're retrieving again as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you.
No problem.
Dave.
Yeah, we've got a question from Nicola. Is there a good way to introduce a new topic that will help with greater retrieval later? You mentioned varying the environments.
The first thing I like to do is think about what research have I read on this, because I like for things to be kind of research led there. And I don't know that I have. I think a good way to, in the United States, we say to hook a learner, right? To get them involved, especially if it's can be used in a bigger context, is to try to make it almost, I'm going to say story-like, but I don't mean it that way, but use it within a context. Again, for psychology, a lot of this is pretty easy for me because most of the stuff we talk about in my class has to deal with human beings. So when I introduce a new context, it's easy for me to introduce it in a way that I can say, well, have you experienced this before? Or have you felt this way before? Or when we talk about conformity, it's easy to talk about in a high school, right? How students conform and wear the same things and sit with the same friends and do all the yada, yada, yada. But then they don't see conformity as this textbook term. They see it within the realm of their life and how it applies to them. And now they're into it, right? So that would be one way I would say to try and introduce a topic is to make it applicable to them. I mean, I know that's not revolutionary, but I think that's a good way to do that, to try and introduce stuff. At least that's what I try to do. But again, my curriculum plays towards being able to do that, right? I know that maybe a math curriculum doesn't so much. Science, you could probably, if you're talking about biology and stuff or human anatomy, you could probably do that. But I think that's a simple way. Make it apply. And then they've also heard that information already in a different context because they're going to, hear me talk about, we're talking about conformity. They're going to hear me talk about how do they see conformity in the lunchroom, right? All the baseball players sit together, right? All the 9th graders sit together and they're going to see conformity that way and they want to act the same way and whatnot. But then when we talk about it within the realm of Solomon Asch's conformity experiment, now they're hearing conformity in a different context. So now they've got another context to hear it within, more cues to draw from, more likely to retrieve the information.
Cool. I've got a question from Robin, and Robin would like to know, have you found over time your students have become better independent learners? Because she's actually found this quite a difficult thing when she's studying for the exams. So.
For sure. Yes, I won't lie to you. you have to front load and just know at the beginning when you're first doing different, brain book buddy, diminishing cues, retrieval practice, like you have to talk students through how to do this. And it takes a while. The first time we do brain book and buddy, even if there's just 10 questions for them to answer, it takes almost probably 40 minutes of class time to do it. Because I have to talk them through, okay, only answer these using your brain. Stop. Now highlight all of your answers. Stop. Now go back through again using your notebooks. Like we have to do it step by step, slowly, right? But over time, the next time we do it, and I say, all right, we're doing brain book buddy, it goes a little faster and it grows a little faster. And by the end of it, I'm having my students, I can walk by my students and they're studying and I can see them highlighting in different colors. And I've not said do this in brain book buddy or whatnot. Yes, they do become more independent. But again, every time we do this, I'm feeding that rhetoric to them. I'm talking to them about, do this on your own. This is proper studying all the time, right? This isn't just how you need to do it in Coach Harvard's psychology class. These also apply in math, in science, in English, in all of your classes. This is how the brain works. This is how you need to study no matter the information. And it's interesting to see them start to apply it. And I'll have kids, every once in a while come back and say, oh my gosh, I use this with learning the periodic table, right? And so on and so forth, right? Talk about using mnemonics and things like that, that we talk about in class also. So yeah, they do become more independent. Some students will take it and just run with it. You know what I mean? They see the big picture a lot faster than others. Others, you have to hold their hand a little bit longer, and that's okay, right? If it takes a whole semester, it takes a whole semester. If at the end of it, they're better learners, that's awesome. So yeah.
Perfect. I think Dave, there's a question from the panelists. I think you're going to take.
Yeah, there's a couple. Caroline's just asked, and I know you touched on this, Blake, but can you give examples of how you use interleaving? She says she's finding it difficult to comprehend, and how to plan for this.
Yeah. Caroline, like I've said it and I know you heard it, but like this is the most difficult one to wrap your head around, at least for me. I think it only works with very particular curriculum that doesn't necessarily need to build off of itself. You know what I mean? Because like I said, in math, oftentimes you need to know how to do this concept before you can apply it and use it doing this concept and then doing this concept. And it has to build off of itself. But like I said with mine, psychology, I can do this a little easier, where we can talk about social psychology for a bit, and then go off and relate it to perhaps cognitive psychology for a couple of lessons, and then say, okay, knowing what we know now about memory and learning, how does this apply to social psychology and why we conform or why we obey role models and things like that. But like, it's tough. It is very tough. And this actually kind of builds into the retrieval practice of it all. If you're going to have conversations about the information, right, you can interleave that way. You can start off with a review with some retrieval practice of a particular concept that maybe you haven't talked about for a week, right? Have some discussion while answering the questions and then say, all right, now this information that we were studying a week ago bleeds right into what we were going to talk about today. So you've kind of revisited whatever concept A before talking about concept B again, right? Like I said, it's tough. It's very difficult to wrap your head around. It takes a person that really knows their curriculum really, really well, right? Knowing exactly what you're going to do for weeks in advance, to be able to think about how can I play with this and give just a little bit of information here, go away from it, and then come back and build on it, right? It's tough, Caroline. And I don't know that I don't believe I've answered your question really well. And I'm sorry for that. But that's all I got. Okay. Give me a break. All right.
No, I find that quite interesting because I think what I really touched on, and I suppose empathized with when you were speaking about interleaving, is I'm going to be blatantly honest that I still can't properly get my head around interleaving.
Yeah, for sure.
I can read all the papers. I can understand exactly what it is you're trying to say it right. is, but like, what really is it? And so actually, I'll be perfectly honest, I've kind of like sided interleaving and just gone
Mhm.
retrieval?
No, well, I mean, the results on experiments and research on different learning strategies, retrieval and space have the best results, I'll say, overall.
Yeah.
So those are definitely the first two to start on before you hit interleaving. Dual coding's another one. There are a lot more, right? But yeah, so definitely don't feel bad. Start with retrieval.
I think
Start with space, study for sure. Those are the first two. I try to get down with my students, for sure. Yeah.
Cool. We've got another question, which is that once you get your students interested in studying in a more effective manner, how do you keep them motivated to continue? And do you have a favorite technique?
Yeah. So those are fantastic questions. So once you get them like, okay, they're on the hook, right? They're like, hey, all right, I'm seeing results from this. That's the biggest hurdle, I think, to get over, right? I think showing them different variations for how to use retrieval practice is a way to keep them interested, is an easy way, right? So instead of just, again, retrieval practice can be as simple as a brain dump. Tell me everything you know. And oftentimes for students, that's fantastic, right? So I'll talk about, okay, guys, so with retrieval practice, let me help you with creating your own homework then, right? So like, as we go through our lecture today or whatever we're doing in class, when you hear like big ideas, write those in the margin of a paper, right? Like if you hear me mention someone's name, a psychologist's name over and over again, and we talk about their experiment over and over again, write that person's name and that experiment over in the margin of a piece of paper somewhere off, right? If you hear a particular concept over and over, write it down, right? And maybe by the end of class, you've got 5, 6, 7 big ideas, big terms that you've said, wow, Coach Harvard's talked about this a lot. It must be important, right? Then when you get home, take that piece of paper out with those 5 or 6 things down, write down everything you remember, right? Now, guess what? You're retrieving. You've spaced out your practice at least a couple of hours. It's incredibly simple. It's incredibly easy. It's low tech, but that's all you need, right? I mean, unfortunately, we're in a situation with a lot of education, especially in the United States, where, if there's not a new program to learn or buy, we kind of doubt its effectiveness, which is incredibly silly, right? But these strategies are that easy. So getting back to the question, I like to vary it up and show them many different ways of retrieving, as far as creating their own little brain dump there, writing a couple of things down, or doing the brain book buddy, right? Is another one. But any way to just show simple variations on retrieval practice usually keeps them hooked, at least for a little while. Plus, it gives them ways to vary things up themselves, because I get it, right? If you do the same thing over and over again, we get tired of it, right? And as far as my favorite, I really like, I've mentioned it a couple of times, the brain book buddy, because again, it's something not only that they can do in psychology class, they can do it for the rest of their lives. And it plays so well on top of any type of information, right? Because again, they're just going to attempt to answer it the first time with their brain, then a notebook or textbook. And then if they've got a buddy they can call or talk to that way. I love it because it's so simple, but so more effective even than just tell me what you know, right? Tell me what you know is great. Don't get me wrong, right? I'm not talking about bad versus good here. I'm talking about good things versus better things. You know what I mean? Which is fantastic, right? If they're attempting to retrieve, no matter what type of retrieval it is, it's a win, right? Over simple restudy, read my textbook, read my notes, right? But I think taking it to the next level there is getting them to think about, how did I answer this? Did I answer this with any cues at all? Did I recall it? Did I recognize it? So, I mean, again, I'll have explicit conversations with my students about recognition versus recall, right? If you need a cue, that's not bad. Don't get me wrong. That's great. But you needed a cue, get to the point where you don't need a cue at all, right? Which is so much better. And Brain Book Buddy does a good job of highlighting, literally and figuratively, for the students, what they know and what they don't know, and what they know using help and what they don't need help on.
Amazing. I've got so we've got quite a lot of questions coming through, Blake. So I hope you're okay to say. And I think this leads on very, very well actually, and it's something I'm particularly interested in about that cue and not cue. So John has asked, what additional support would you offer students with additional sort of SEND, which is the or SEMH, and poor memory retention? Now, I'm quite interested in the idea of poor memory retention as to whether or not is that a thing.
Sure. So, I mean, there's
what strategies would we give for those students that actually do need that extra support?
Yeah, sure. So, first thing I'll say is that there is definitely evidence out there that different people have different, I'll say, ability for their working memory. Some can retain more in their memory for longer than others, right? So I definitely believe that's a thing for sure. So for students who maybe don't remember, I'll say just remember as well, right? I like to start them off with recognition and let them see that they can be successful even when there are multiple cues versus no cues. And that's just a simple way, because I totally understand being given 5 recall questions and you can't recall any of them. And this guy's standing up here talking to me about how this is better for me, but I don't know any of the answers. So why is this better for me, right? So providing, again, and that's kind of some of the diminishing cues there, right? Is provide cues to start and have them slowly but surely remove the cues until they are recalling. You know what I mean? One thing that I do in class, and now this is all just Blake Harvard talk right here, okay?
We love it.
Yeah, so don't take this anywhere. This is me, all right? So
It's going to be quoted everywhere now, isn't it? Harvard,
no,
2020.
No. So I kind of have a theory. Right? Because I wonder myself how much has to do with how grandiose my working memory and long-term memory is versus another person, versus how I encode the information. Whether it's iconic, echoic, semantic encoding, which is like the meaning of it all, right? And to a certain extent, okay, and again, there's no science behind this. This is just me thinking, and that's super dangerous. But to a certain extent, I wonder how much those kids who do better in school, right? And we kind of all lump that all together, right? Kids that make better grades, learn better, yada, 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 right? I wonder how much of it has to do to how much they just naturally think differently about the information. Whereas some students may just hear the term and that's it, right? But others may naturally think about the term and try to incorporate it without any help at all. Try to incorporate it into how they, how does this apply to me, so on and so forth, versus other students without any prompting at all. Because I do this, like the best thing I do in my class all year, and I do this day 1, right? And I've never told anyone this, so this is like free stuff here. So
is this a BrewEdClee, like?
This is all for you guys.
Amazing.
So the first thing I do in class with my students, getting past the like, hello, my name is, Coach Harvard, yada, yada, yada. So I do this thing where I give half of the class instructions and half of the class a different set of instructions. Now the students believe they're all getting the same set of instructions. And what it says for half of the class is, as your teacher reads these sentences out loud, think about how vividly you can make a mental image of what he says, right? So think about how you can make a mental image of what he says. The other kids, their instructions say, as he reads these sentences out loud, think about how difficult it would be for you to say them, right? So I've got half the class thinking about the information and trying to imagine it, picture it. The other half of the class is hearing the information and simply listening to the words. Is this tricky to say? And then what they have to do per every sentence is they have to rate it on a scale from 1 to 5. 5, very difficult, 1, very easy. And they listen to those sentences, all 20 of them, right? And again, all of the students think they have the same instructions. They don't know anything's going on, okay? Then what I do after I get them to actually get them to divert their attention to something else for about 30 seconds, I come back and I ask them 10 questions about the statements, right? So one of the statements that I read is, let me see if I can think of one of them. The noisy fan blew the papers off the table. So that's one example of one of the sentences I would read to them. The noisy fan blew the papers off the table. And then I might come back at the end and say, okay, what blew the papers off the table? Right? And I've got the kids over here on one side that had to picture a fan blowing and papers blowing off of a table. And the other kids are just thinking about a noisy fan off the table, right? And they're just thinking about the words. And the results of this are absolutely amazing, right? Because when I ask them the questions, at the end I say, all right, how many got 1 right? How many got 2 right? How many got 3 right? And I'm telling you, almost every single time, the kids who had to imagine and think about and semantically encode, right? Because to imagine what noisy fan is and papers blowing off the table, you have to know what all of those things are.
You know what fan is.
So you have to define, basically.
Yeah.
Right? The kids who imagine will almost always, all of them pass. So if I ask 10 questions about those 20 sentences, 7, 8, 9, 10 correct. The kids over here, 2, 3, 4 correct, and that's it. It has nothing to do necessarily with how big their working memory is. It's how they thought about the information. And I'll have the valedictorian over here sitting on the side that had to just think about the words, and he'll get 2 or 3 out of 10 right, or she'll get 2 or 3 out of 10 right. And I'll have a kid over here who's number 200 in their class, not anywhere close, right? And he or she'll get 8 out of 10 right. And I will say it point blank. Look at your classmates. You know who always gets better grades, right? Did it matter who gets better grades for who did better on this? No. It had to do with how you thought about the information. So, and this one little strategy right here, this little activity is mind-blowing for my kids because it puts them on equal footing, right? Because those kids that don't always do as well, it's hard to not feel like in the shadow of the kids who are making straight A's and always do well and so on and so forth. But to see that kid who always makes straight A's get a 3 out of 10, and I got an 8 out of 10, right? It's eye-opening for kids. It gives some kids hope, right? That like, wait a minute, this is pretty cool. Like, at least it gives me a little bit of validity as a teacher for a minute, right? Like, whoa, he knows what he's doing at least, maybe. And it's mind-blowing for the kids, and it sets the tone for the entire class. And that kind of leads into I don't know how much working memory matters as far as, and maybe just the kids that do better, just intuitively think differently with the information.
Do you think do you think it, because like, yeah, I'm with you. It is, isn't it? It's that point when you have children who have, so we have a system, I don't know if it's similar in America, we have a system where when students who get removed from school for various reasons, like, you know, and they go to what we refer to as an alternative provision. But by that point as well, they still need to be taught, but there's a lot of nurture that needs to go in. There's a massive lot of nurture that needs to go in, but they still need to be taught, but they don't believe in themselves.
Sure.
But they then get this power almost, like that retrieval idea, that showing them that they are actually, okay, to be fair, they're not going to get those like really, really high grades just like those other people, but they actually can almost challenge them as well because they can know.
It's huge. It's huge for some students because those kids that are at the top, for the most part, I mean, I know I'm generalizing here, they don't need any motivation, right? Or they need a lot less motivation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And this gives a lot of motivation to those kids who aren't. And, you know, that's a small part of why I do it. But another reason is it's a great hook for the entire class. Like the kids love it. And it feeds nicely into cognitive psychology and memory and learning, which is typically what I start off my entire class with. That's the first units I cover. It's fantastic. And just so I give credit where credit is due, I've got this activity. I didn't come up with this activity myself. It comes from my textbook. Meyer Psychology for AP. It's fantastic. And that little thing, and I've done this, and I don't just do this with kids. I've spoken to faculties with hundreds of teachers and done the same thing, and you get the same results. And every time I wait, I'm like, this is the time it's not going to work, right? It's going to backfire. It always works. The kids or the teachers who are semantically encoding the meaning, making a picture of it, are always going to do better than those that are just paying attention to words. It's fantastic. It's amazing. Super cool.
That's it. It's the making the meaning, isn't it? Which is what's so important. And of course, they do that through the retrieval process too, don't they? That's not just interest in new knowledge. It is making meaning of what came before.
For sure.
Love it.
Yeah.
Dave,
is there any more questions?
I think there was one more here. Blake, I'm a regular reader of your Ask the Researcher series. I want to know, how can you get peers or leadership on staff interested in using these practices at a department level? I read a lot of research, but I'm moving to a new school in 2 weeks, and I'm unsure of how to start this conversation.
Yeah. So I think, if you read my stuff, you know that I'm big into, I want to do things that research shows at least has some positive effect, right? Nothing's perfect. Nothing works everywhere, but on the whole, I want to do things that work better, which, by the way, my next little blog is going to be about that. Hopefully I'll get that out in the next day or two, relating it to superfoods and consumption of good food. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, I want to not only do this myself, but I want other teachers and I want my administrators to know these types of things. So, it can be a difficult situation because it really depends on the administrator, right? Like, if your administration is open to hey, I want to learn too, I want to do better, then talking to them about these sorts of things is really, really easy, right? But if you've got an administrator who, is going to, I'll say look down, but is I know more and you're down here, it's tough. It's tough. But, I would start, I don't know, as non-confrontational, I guess, as possible. Maybe just a quick email. Hey, I read this, and I think it can apply in my class. What do you think about it? Right. And then you'll get kind of a feel for, okay, hey, I sent this, about whatever retrieval practice to my teacher or to my administrator, and he or she loved it. Right. They're open to new ideas, or maybe they'll say, hey, will you present this to the entire faculty, or would you mind talking? And then you've got the open door and you can go from there. Especially, you said you're starting at a new school. I would be, I know if I was starting at a new school, I would be super weary about going kind of guns a-blazing and hey, I know all this great stuff, learn from me. So I would maybe start with just a non-confrontational email, hey, here's some things I've been reading about as I better myself, right? And I better my teaching. What do you think about it? I think it would apply, to a wide extent to a lot of our teachers, something like that, right? Because, I'm fortunate to teach on a great hallway with a lot of wonderful teachers that I can call friends, right? We've been together for 3 or 4 years now, all teaching together. So, I'll share stuff with them, and they take it really nicely, right? Now they may say, oh, it's great, Blake, and then do nothing with it, but at least they're nice about it, right? But, teaching is very personal, right? It's very personal. Teachers don't like to think oh my gosh, I haven't been doing the best for my students, right? So you have to be very careful how you come across, and I believe as non-confrontational as possible, and just kind of hey, I read this. I think it might apply in your classroom. What do you think? Something like that.
Brilliant.
I'm trying to multitask. I'm trying to tweet as well. I'm not very good at that.
No one's good at multitasking. You can't do it. It's impossible.
That's why I threw it in there. I thought that would be another discussion. Let's talk.
Multitasking. Sit down, kids. It's another hour. So,
brilliant.
To be honest, Blake, I would quite happily just stay here all night and chat to you.
Well,
I have so many questions, but I don't want to I'm sure everybody else would just get bored with me asking all these questions. No, but I think I'm just gonna go for that one again. I am so interested in this idea of the diminishing the cues.
Yeah.
So in my classroom, how would you suggest I kind of start that? Like because previously I think I would just go, right, I'm going to do retrieval. I know what I'm going for, this, that, and the other. But actually, not only, I suppose, so how do I diminish my cues? If I want my staff as well to understand this, what should I do too? Because actually, I suppose that way, I want to explain to my staff, like, I can go, retrieval's amazing, brilliant, give you data.
Yep.
But what strategies can I actually give my staff to go, you're doing this?
No, that's a
and I do apologize because I'm just actually keeping you on because I'm so interested.
No, that's a great question. So this diminishing cues is something I've read about since we've been out of school, right? So I've been kind of actually mulling this over myself. Like, how am what is this going to look like in front of a student? What are they going to see, right? And I've kind of been going back and forth with maybe to kind of hide it, I guess, is to start off as maybe have it as like a multiple choice question, and A, B, C, D, and E are different cues, right? And maybe take one away. I don't, but I'm not too sure. If I'm trying to talk to staff and faculty about it, because you like to model it, right? You want them to see that it works. Gosh, I don't know. My mind goes to something that isn't, because if you're talking to faculty and staff, you're talking to math and English and loads of different subjects. So you can't be like, just zero in on one subject. So you got to do something kind of more universal. I don't know. Maybe something like from the local grocery store, or like on what aisle is this? I don't know. I don't know. That's something I'm actually like, I'm thinking about, how is this going to look in my classroom? And now that I'm going virtual, I really got to think about, how am I going to present this to kids via the internet, So I don't have a good answer there. I'm sorry, but one day I will. I will have a good answer there eventually, because I will be doing it in class again, because it reaches the wider range of students' desirable difficulties, right? It's not too difficult for so many. So yeah. And again, for the research on that, I wrote something up on my blog about it, but I'll try to repost that on Twitter soon. I want to say it was by Dr. Carpenter, who I believe is out of St. Louis, but I'm not sure. Anyway, yeah.
I'm going to throw this out there. So if you have, if we've got students like, in this alternative provision, and we have this thing called vocational studies over here. Sure. How do we incorporate the retrieval into what's a vocational study? They use the term a skill, so mechanics. So how can how would I, or how can I incorporate retrieval into mechanics?
Sure. So I think so no matter what the vocation is, whether it's working on air conditioners or a car or refrigerators, whatever, right? And those are your kind of vocational skills, which are ridiculously important, right? There's still some base bit of knowledge that they've got to know about, right? If they're looking under the hood of a car, they need to know what the engine looks like. They need to know what a piston is. They need, you know what I mean? And so on and so forth. So there is, to a certain extent, there is still some written, just base knowledge they've got to know, content knowledge, before they can move to actually working on it, for the most part, right? So I think, by having those types of base tests, I don't know how you guys do it in England, but in the United States, before students can have a driver's license, they have to take a written test. There's a written test, and then there's the actual get in a car with someone and drive around, right? So there is some studying to be done for that written test, because you need to know what a stop sign looks like, so on and so forth, right? But even when the mechanic gets to the hood is up and we're looking under a car, right? They need to be tested on knowing where different things are under that hood. So that could just be the instructor asking them to find those different. You can tell how much of a mechanic I am, by the way, right?
You can see I'm nodding because I have no idea.
Yeah. I could say anything right now and you'd be like, yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, the girder thing. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I got it. Yeah. Whether the retrieval is on a piece of paper or the retrieval is pointing at something or the retrieval is having a conversation, it's all retrieval, right? It's all, I've had to retrieve this from my brain to use it in a conversation, or use it to change a tire, or use it to mark A on a piece of paper. It's all retrieval, you know?
I think that's the great point I think I wanted to get to, that I think if we're going to incorporate retrieval, we can't just think about it as being writing something down on a piece of paper.
Exactly.
That in actual fact that there's much more to it, and it's not inclusive, and it's not exclusive either.
Sure, definitely, 100%. Yeah. So like I spoke to my art teacher here at my school about this a bit, right? And I love the line she used, because I went to an art show, and you had like your art 1 students, your art 2, your art 3, and your art 4. And your art 4 were super complex, super awesome. And your art 1 was like structure figure drawing, right? Like triangles and shapes and stuff. And you can kind of see the progression from art 1 to art 4 of how much freer the students got, right? And I said, well, how do you get them from art 1 to art 4, right? She said, and I love this line, she said, you've got to teach them the rules so that they can break the rules, right? So they've got to know the rules of how to shade. They've got to know the rules of how to draw at different depths, right? And then knowing those rules, they can break the rules, and they can use them to create something super cool. But you don't just start out in art 4 breaking the rules. You got to know them first. And I think that was so like, oh man, that's amazing, right? No matter how, creative, whatever skill you're doing is, whatever it is, there's still some base stuff you got to know, which is, again, I think universal. So
amazing.
Like Heather's asked, and I was going to ask you this anyway, but the activity that you referred to.
Sure.
Is there a link, or could you signpost where we might be able to find out more about that?
I don't have it I don't have it anywhere yet. I'll see if I can get permission, because it is coming from a textbook company, and they kind of have the rights on that. But I will see if I can put it up, and if I can, I'll give it to you, because it's fantastic. I'll be honest with you. So I've done this again with the faculty where I work, right? With 120 teachers, and afterwards, 20 of them will come up to me and be like, I need that right now, right? I need it right now. And I tell them no, because if all of the teachers in my school are doing it, it won't have the effect that I want it to have, right? I'm like, I can't give it to you, because if they do it in your class first, when they come to me, they'll be like, oh yeah, I've already done this before, right? Oh, and I see Heather said just the name of the textbook. So hold on.
I love it conveniently at the back of your shelf.
Picture.
It's Myers Psychology for AP. Now this is the 2nd edition. My lovely textbook rep just sent me the 3rd edition. If you need that one, it's all updated. But Myers Psychology. Dr. David Myers is making a killing writing psychology textbooks.
Do we need to get Dr. Myers on, Blake?
If you could,
maybe.
If you could,
actually, no, we're much more interested. Can we get the Bjorns?
I'll be honest with you, it wouldn't hurt to ask. I'm telling you, like everything I've ever asked.
You clearly have got an in point, so.
Oh, you're asking me to ask that? Oh, that's different. Okay.
Blake's now Team BrewEdClee. I like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so have we got any more questions from?
First, Amy's said that she's building a bank of potential ideas for diminishing cues and activities already.
Let's go.
Thanks very much, Blake.
Share with everyone.
Yeah, so having the impact already. I think that's it, Blake. A big thank you from me. This has been great, and I felt we could do. Me and Dave could just let Louise just talk to you, I think, all night long.
Sure.
I'm happy listening, if I'm honest. But.
Right on. Well, I've had a great time. It's been lovely. I love sharing stuff like this. So yeah, thank you to everyone for listening. Again, if you have any questions, I'm on the Twitter, right? All over it. My website. Find me. Ask me questions.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much. We
Thank you,
really
Blake.
do appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you, guys.
Cheers, Blake. Thank you. Oh, he's recording.
Is it just us 3 now?
Yeah, and everyone. There's 16 attendees.
I need to go. Because I'm just like, this is mental. Like, how I am so sorry. Right, can I just do the normal Lou thing where Lou goes, I'm so sorry for like just completely going mental at a certain point and asking loads of questions. Oh my goodness. Hello?
Hello. Frozen 2 didn't last, did it? I'm going to get money back from Disney Plus. This is terrible.
Who's this one?
Eli. Say hello.
Hello. No, I wouldn't want to say hello to me either, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm just like,
I missed like 5 minutes of it. I was in there, and I came back in, and it was a textbook saga. I was like, I missed that bit. I wouldn't.
Dave, where are you? I need you as well.
He's brilliant, isn't he?
I
think the word is authentic, isn't it? It just flows.
Do you know what? There is nothing, and I suppose, do you know what? When it maybe comes down to the way we work and our practice and stuff, and you know, the whole targets and doing this and doing that, and you're told to do this and you're told to do this and this, that and the other. And do you know what? He's actually just passionately doing something for the fact that it works well and it works for his kids, and it just takes you on a journey and you're blown away, and it's just like,
oh, Helena's put this is my favourite part of BrewEdClee.
Digression.
Jay, can you let them in?
Can we let them in? I'm pretty sure we can, can't we? I can allow them. Oh, I can promote them all to panellists. Shall I do that?
Yeah, promote them all to panellists. Get them in.
So, if you want to, but I'm promoting you all to panellists, by the way. If you're
you like it or not?
You can leave if you so wish. That is fine. But
I don't know if they're going to be able to show the video though, Jay.
Yeah, because you're going to have to like
stop the video. Who's recording? Oh, there's my other one.
Invite them all in.
Yeah.
Who's recording then? Just stop recording.
I'll stop recording. I'll stop recording now.